Hello everyone, welcome to Fundamental Analysis tutorial series for Forex traders. So let's get started for today's topic. So today we are going to discuss business economic cycle. It is also called business cycle and business economic cycle. So it's one and the same thing. So what is a business cycle? It's a cycle of expansion and contraction or recession that economies of the countries go through over a period of time. When an expansion phase ends, we see a recession. Recession starts, and recession ends at the trough of the business cycle. Now we have four stages of business cycle. Number one, expansion; two, peak; number three, contraction or recession; and number four, trough. Now, to identify levels of business cycle, economists or the policymakers around the world use different indicators that where the business cycle is at a current point in time. So the indicators used are mainly GDP, gross domestic product, consumer spending, interest rate, and inflation. So these are the main indicators that the economists use. There could be other indicators, but these are the main ones. So let's look at this graph to understand the business cycle. We have timeline on the x-axis and gross domestic product on the y-axis, and we take real numbers of gross domestic product. So we see there's a trough stage and it goes into expansion, and then it reaches at the peak point at some time, and from there it falls down, goes into a recession and contraction period, and then it is trough phase, and from there it begins to recover and goes into the expansion cycle once again. So let's look at the business cycle from a different perspective. It's almost the same picture. We see the expansion phase, we see peak and recession, but then we see a depression phase. So what is depression? Depression is where the GDP reduces by 10%, which is a lot, and the recession period prolongs for about 3 to 4 years. And this extreme phase of recession is called depression. So the economists have also suffered depression at some point. So let's talk about different phases of the business cycle one by one. So the first one is expansion. In the expansion phase, businesses are expanding, they are growing, everything's going smooth. Employment, consumer spending, GDP is on the rise, unemployment is very low, industrial production is high, and inflation is also high, and people have a lot of income to spend. So there are all the positive signs in the expansion phase. So in the peak phase, from the expansion phase, it reaches the peak phase where economy is like becoming exhausted, or it is becoming saturated, and we see GDP slows down. The businesses have attained maximum productive output. Employment begins to decrease, and as a result, income also decreases. And from there on, we go into the contraction and recession phase. We see this downward curve of contraction and recession where the economy contracts. We see almost all the negative indicators. For example, unemployment increases, GDP decreases, industrial production stops, and we see businesses suffer defaults and bankruptcies. As a result, income decreases and consumer spending also decreases. And from there on, we reach at the trough stage, which is the last stage. And at this point, we see the signs of recovery. That is, the steps taken during contraction, they bring results into something positive. We see the stocks values rise, production increases, business begin to expand again, GDP increases, and as a result, consumer demands and consumer income and employment begin to increase. So, in order to understand in a different perspective, what is a recession, which is called a vicious cycle as well, when economies go into a spiral phase where everything goes into negative, sales fall, production falls, employment falls, and income falls, and it keeps going on and on. And on the other hand, what is a recovery? We call it a virtuous cycle where everything we experience is on the positive side. where employment rises, production rises, sales rise, and also income rises, and then it keeps on going on in cycles. So, which is kind of a positive. Everything is positive. So, in order to look at a recession and recovery collectively in one graph, so this is where we see the expansion ends when it goes upward, where this is the point where expansion ends and recession starts. And recession starts at the end, starts dipping down, down, and it goes to the rock bottom. And this is where we see the extreme recession. And when recession ends, recovery starts. So this is where we see that it begins to go upward, and from there it goes into the recovery phase, and then expansion continues. So some additional notes about the business cycle. The longest expansion period, the economic longest economic expansion period we have experienced is just recently from 2009 to 2020. It was the longest expansion period for about 128 months. And the generally accepted rule is that the two consecutive quarters of growth in real GDP are the beginning of an expansion, whereas two successive quarters of declining real GDP indicates that it is the start of a contraction. And according to NBER, it's an institute in USA, the average length of a recession is 11 months, where the average length of an expansion period is about 58 months. And that's about it. See you next time. Have a good day. Bye bye.